Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where I'm going to revisit Ethereum. I think it's the right time to do that now, with so many developments having happened over the last year or so. And we're also seeing in mid-2019 a bit of a resurgence in the interest in crypto. I say cryptocurrency, but there's more to Ethereum than that. Some of that resurgence is purely because the price of Bitcoin has actually increased again, and people are now just more interested in it. But that's not what Ethereum is all about. So I thought, let me follow up to an article that I wrote about 2 years ago called Understanding Ethereum, and revisit some of the key concepts, because I think over the next few months what I will do is make a few videos just on Ethereum and its potential, especially as a decentralized finance platform. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Some of you will have heard of Bitcoin, and when we talk blockchain, we're not really referring to Bitcoin specifically. The creators of Bitcoin, who are unknown today, creators, they needed something very specific to get their goal of this electronic digital currency. And there's a phrase that says necessity is the mother of invention. That's exactly what happened with Bitcoin and the blockchain technology. So they basically used cryptography to create this decentralized platform, decentralized nodes that would confirm blocks that are written, and inside of those blocks are transactions, highly secure transactions. And because it's running on a decentralized network, nodes all around the world, nobody owns this network. The more nodes you have, basically the network is more resilient, and so on and so on. So this concept expanded, and the blockchain facilitated this peer-to-peer electronic decentralized cash. I say cash because it's now probably more known as a store of value, gold 2.0. That is what Bitcoin is. What happened after that was, a few years later, some smart people, including somebody called Vitalik looked at it and said, well, actually the tool that they use, or the invention, the blockchain, they used this to create Bitcoin. There's a lot more potential in this blockchain, especially if we make it smart, if we give these blocks the ability to execute pieces of code. Okay, and around about 2013, Vitalik launched the Ethereum white paper describing his vision for something called Ethereum, the Ethereum network, the Ethereum virtual machine. And so the biggest difference was the ability to write code in these blocks which would execute according to specific events. And these were known as smart contracts. And I suppose the reason why we call these contracts is because the envisioning at the time was these would be contracts between two addresses. You have a unique address for the, let's call it the buyer and the sender of value, of money, in this case the ether. I'll talk about that in a minute. And based on an event that happens, a time or some signal, the smart contract kicks in and can facilitate a transfer of wealth between address A and address B. So that's what a smart contract is. However, it can do more now as these contracts become more and more complex. So that is the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Ethereum came about as a global network, decentralized as well, immutable, not owned by anyone, not controlled by anyone. That's the idea. So if you run a piece of code, a smart contract on this network, it has a form of sovereignty, right? In addition to decentralization. That's what's so exciting about Ethereum. Now, I mentioned ether, or the value. Some people might say to you, buy Ethereum, it's a good investment. What they're actually referring to there is the Ether token, or if I could call it that, right? And this is how the Ethereum network works. For me to be able to store items in these blocks, in the blockchain, for me to be able to facilitate a transaction, and for the miners to be able to receive rewards, we need some form of value to be transferred back and forth. Ether is that form of value. Okay, so there are a fixed number of Ether tokens, if I could call it tokens. I think it's 99 billion or 99 million. Unlike Bitcoin, which had 21 million Bitcoin, a whole bunch of those were lost. So the actual circulating supply of Bitcoin is significantly lower than that. And that's one of the reasons it has become the store of value, because of finite supply, and it's anti-inflationary. It could actually be deflationary. So on Ethereum, this network which runs these smart contracts, these autonomous pieces of code, if I could call it that, the store of value that will be used to pay for services, a very small way of describing that, is the ether. And the ether gets divided up even further into something called gas, and gas powers the network. Gas is just a fraction of an ether. So when somebody says invest in ether, in Ethereum, they're actually referring to buying ether, because if the Ethereum network becomes very popular, has massive use cases going forward, then everybody would need ether for their smart contracts to run on this network, and the value of ether could go up. I'm not saying it will, I'm not a financial advisor, but that is actually where the old concept of buying Ethereum comes in. So the developments that were made have basically been since then a maturity in this global decentralized network. More developers, more apps being written. dApps is what they call it, decentralized applications, right? But we're still in very, very early days. A lot of these dApps, for example, even today are games and gambling platforms. And I think the value to society for Ethereum, the Ethereum network, is not just games and gambling platforms. I think it's fine if people write and deploy those, they have the right to do so. However, when we explore things like decentralized finance, which is actually the purpose of this video, I wanted to talk about some of the more advanced concepts, things that are possible with this Ethereum network. But then you think, okay, well, those are more important, right? If they could coexist with these games and gambling platforms, that's fine. But that leads me to another issue that we've seen, and that is one of scalability. So let's talk about scalability. So in the quest to maintain decentralization, autonomy, a trustless global network, the problem we had starting with Bitcoin is that the amount of transactions per second is exceedingly low. I think it's about 7. And the reason for that is because for a transaction to be confirmed, a percentage of nodes around the world in this global network need to confirm the transaction. The actual process, the reason it's called mining, is because the original creators didn't make it easy. A computation algorithm needed to be solved, some sort of algorithmic puzzle, and this takes computing power in order for the block to be confirmed. And when a number of nodes actually does this, the block then gets written to the blockchain, it's confirmed. Basically, this is called a proof of work scenario. A large amount of computational work needs to be done for this block to be confirmed, and that inherently gives it some form of value, right? There have been criticisms regarding this proof of work method, because obviously if a lot of computational power is being used, ultimately you are using a lot of electricity. Okay, so that's the first criticism. The second thing, getting back to my earlier point, is that this utilizes a lot of electricity. Okay, and it actually makes it very slow. Your transaction speed is very slow. So the Ethereum network will undergo a whole bunch of upgrades. We've seen upgrades that Bitcoin has been implementing, like the Lightning Network, segregated witness, in which the witness information is taken out of the block, making more space inside of the block, Schnorr signatures and that type of thing. But the biggest one is probably the Lightning Network. In the Lightning Network, smaller transactions, like for example, if I buy a cup of coffee using Bitcoin, don't actually get written to the main net, the main Bitcoin blockchain. And that's because it would crowd, you only have a limited number of transactions. So you don't want this relatively unimportant transaction to be written there. Instead, what happens is it's written to these Lightning nodes, and certain more important transactions actually get committed onto the actual Bitcoin blockchain. Now, there are other types of scaling solutions which Ethereum will implement. The Ethereum rate of transactions per second is higher than Bitcoin, maybe around 25 to 30 per second, but nowhere near a global financial payment system of today like MasterCard, which runs, I think, at about 5,000 to 6,000 transactions per second. So as you can see, right now, scaling of this is a massive problem, but it's being looked at. What are the scenarios? So smart contracts are what gives Ethereum scenarios, both in terms of decentralized applications, but specifically, and the purpose of this video is to talk about decentralized finance, okay? Decentralized finance is what we're interested in. Okay, so let's talk about these smart contracts, right? The main benefits of these smart contracts is that they're global, distributed, tamper-proof. We use a concept called immutable. And we use another concept called trustless, and that means that they don't inherently need trust. The network itself is trusted. So I want to talk about what can be done, and I'll give you a simple example of how these Ethereum smart contracts can actually bypass the middleman, and that's one of the ways in which the potential can be realized. So let's say, for example, we have a timed event. Let's say that you would like to leave a very large lump sum of money to your son, but he only gets it on his 18th birthday. So what you could have is you set up an Ethereum address for him, and you have an Ethereum address with a large amount of Ether, the actual value asset in the Ethereum network. And when a certain date is reached, the entire contents gets transferred from one Ethereum address to the other. That's a very simple example. You don't need a middleman to do it. If you pass away, you know that this is running on this resilient network. You don't need some organization to make sure that it happens. It will happen unless Ethereum disappears overnight. That is the benefit of a smart contract in this situation, right? Especially something autonomous, which brings me to the DAO, the DAO. These smart contracts then can give rise to the concept of the DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization. So this is an exciting concept because basically you have an organization, in quotes, that does a certain job or task. It's not controlled by anyone. It's not even controlled by its creators. The creators write the code of the DAO, deploy it to the Ethereum network, and it just runs. It runs forever. Or rather, it runs until it can stop funding itself. It runs out of gas, literally. So that's an interesting concept. And that is now, you start to see the value of these distributed applications. So I would say that any autonomous organization, any advanced smart contract that is providing public services for the betterment of the public, the global public in this case, should be running on the Ethereum network. And as I mentioned, right now we have games and gambling apps, and I see these games as nice for testing the network. There was a famous one called CryptoKitties, which actually brought the network down, I think in 2017, 2018. But we didn't have any concept of of scale at that point, right? The real interesting thing comes, there are some theories out there that the code on these DAOs could eventually become self-aware, and then you have very advanced autonomous entities existing on these global decentralized networks. I think we're very far away from that, but it could happen one day, and it's interesting to see where that will take us, right? Almost like a living entity running on this global network of processing nodes. Very interesting. Now, another concept is something, for example, in the financial world called escrow, where a third party holds on to something of value. And I suppose that's very related to the example that I've just given you. In this case, you wouldn't need the third party. You could use the Ethereum network for escrow purposes, okay? Like the example I've given you. One of the most exciting autonomous organizations that have come about recently is something called Maker, the Maker DAO. Some of you would have heard about it. This is fascinating. What they're offering is a form of stability, as well as decentralized financial services, a totally global decentralized financial platform. And the one thing Maker has brought is what's known as a stable coin, which is called DAI, D-A-I. Now, why would you need a stable coin? It solves the problem that we've seen over the last few years, in that the inherent value of any cryptocurrency or crypto asset is actually quite volatile and not stable at all. So the best way to explain this would be to go back to the example that I've given you earlier. Let's say I would like to give, or a father wants to give his son $1 million on his 18th birthday. So he uploads the equivalent value of $1 million as Ether, and there's a smart contract which will release that to his son's Ethereum address on his 18th birthday. However, with the value of Ether going up and down by the day, you could get to that point where the smart contract should be released and it's not worth $1 million at all. In fact, it could be worth half of that. So how do you cater for that? What Maker are doing is they've launched a stable coin, which is an asset that can be utilized by a distributed decentralized network like Ethereum. However, the value of the stable coin is tied to, in this case, the US dollar, a fiat asset. And that will solve a problem where we want to measure the release of assets or monetary assets on these networks, but we want to measure them in the equivalent fiat currency, in this case US dollars. Now that may change where we reach a world where crypto assets plateau. They reach their natural values, which many people say will be significantly higher than what we have today, and they become very stable. But Maker is one of the best examples of why I say the Ethereum network holds so much potential, and there will be many makers in future, right? So just a few other things. How do we scale? I mentioned that Ethereum can't really do more than maybe 20-25 transactions per second. There are a few concepts coming along. One is called sharding. Sharding works, if you're familiar with databases, and some of you who know me know, that's a topic that I love. You have basically databases like MPP systems, like Microsoft's APS system, where the data is equally distributed but not replicated across processing and compute nodes. So anyone who's worked with an MPP system like Microsoft APS would know about this concept. This is exactly the concept they're trying to bring to Ethereum, where a node does not process all the data, but a series of nodes together process just a smaller piece of the data. So the question is, what effect will sharding have on the resiliency, the immutability of the Ethereum network? So that's something I don't have an answer to today, but I'm sure they're building it in such a way where it wouldn't be impacted. The other scaling solution for Ethereum is actually very similar to Bitcoin's Lightning Network, which is off-chain scaling. So as I mentioned earlier, you'll get to a point where only significant transactions are actually committed to your mainnet, your main blockchain. Smaller transactions, in the case of Bitcoin, I use the example of buying a cup of coffee. Now those will actually be committed to Lightning nodes, and you might see a similar solution crop up for the Ethereum network, and some of the technologies that are being spoke of include things like Raiden, the Raiden network. So do a bit of research into that. So we can scale these smart contracts. We see tremendous potential for these decentralized applications, especially in the world of finance, escrow, loans. We can remove the middleman from a lot of these contracts today. We have an asset of value on this network, which is called Ether, and that is actually what you're buying when somebody says to you, let's buy Ethereum, it's a good investment. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview of what all of this is. I will tell you something that I'm fairly certain of. This isn't set in stone. This could change rapidly in 6 months, and it probably will, in the sense of we're going to see exciting new uses for smart contracts, number one. So I predict that for the remainder of 2019. We're going to see a lot of competitive smart contract platforms. We already have. In my article, my predictions for 2018, I spoke about the smart contract wars. So back then I could see that this would become a big thing once the potential of decentralized applications is actually revealed, and we're starting to see that now in 2019. So you have competing technologies like Neo, which a lot of the work is being done in China. Cardano, the token is called ADA, and I believe some of the work's being done in Japan, and stuff like EOS and Tron. I will be honest, I think right now Ethereum has the focus of a much bigger developer community. And I'll tell you in a minute one of the reasons for that. So I think some of these other platforms actually claim to have much better scaling out the box without any need for layer 2 solutions, right? Off-chain scaling, and it is very impressive. But at what cost? Some of them seem to basically do that at a cost of decentralization. The one thing I like about Ethereum is that whatever decision has been taken, they always favor decentralization. It stays true to its purpose, and I think that's very important. I think if you just want to go transaction speed and you make sacrifices in every other area, you just end up with a database, okay? A database that is less centralized, and you're not offering anything new. We've had databases since the late 1970s, right? And highly scalable ones at that too. So I think the Ethereum decision to favor decentralization is particularly important. The other thing is, obviously, I spoke of Neo and a lot of work being done in China. There's probably some distrust of Ethereum, seeing as it originated in the West, but you will see the reverse as well. So I'm not sure which of those platforms will really take off. For now, Ethereum has captured the developer community. The language that you write these smart contracts in Ethereum is something called Solidity. And what's nice is that Solidity is very similar to JavaScript. So any JavaScript developer can start learning this language. That's learning the language. Learning how to write decentralized applications is a totally different thing. From what I've heard, it's quite complex, and once you deploy your smart contract onto the Ethereum network or any other network, firstly, everything's exposed. People can see the code, people can see the variable values or asset values. It's almost like writing firmware. Once it's been deployed, that's it, it's executing. But some work has been done in that field as well, as to how you update and evolve your smart contract platforms. So that's one thing I want to talk about. Then the other thing is that another reason why Ethereum seems to have captured the developer community is obviously, and this is where I've seen it, a lot of it myself personally, is that Microsoft is doing a lot of work with Vitalik on Ethereum to bring Ethereum to Azure. Now this is a discussion that confuses a lot of people, right? Firstly, some people say, well, what's the point putting nodes in Azure? They wouldn't be decentralized. No, they would still be decentralized because only a piece of the network would have nodes on a cloud platform. But that isn't even what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the emergence of what we call consortium chains. Consortium chains use the blockchain technology, but create a copy of this blockchain, and sometimes they're not running on a public network where there are nodes, all over the place in somebody's bedroom. For business purposes, you may want solutions being deployed to these consortium chains. Now, I don't see these type of solutions replacing what we have described thus far on the main Ethereum network. We're talking about something that's decentralized, autonomous. That's not what a consortium chain is. Consortium chain, typically for business purposes, will use the technology, but running it in an enterprise environment, if I could call it that, although typically on a cloud platform like Microsoft Azure. Now, Microsoft has really embraced the Ethereum technology. Earlier this year, just about a month ago, we saw at the Microsoft Build conference, Mark Russinovich, the CTO of Azure, talking with Vitalik. They did like a bit of a video talking about future developments. And what's interesting is I actually got to meet Mark in 2018. He did a blockchain talk, blockchain on Azure talk in Las Vegas, and got my picture taken with him and shook hands with him. So thus far in life, I haven't met Vitalik, but I did shake hands with Mark Russinovich, who's shaking hands with Vitalik. So 2 layers of separation there. That's quite exciting. And some of the things we're seeing is that on these platforms, you're allowing businesses to run without impacting the public Ethereum network. As I said, if you have 10,000 businesses and each one of them want to use a blockchain solution for their partners, what are these consortium solutions all about? Well, wherever you need a mix of companies in a supply chain or value chain working together, a consortium blockchain solution would actually be quite useful. It's not owned by one of the entities. It's running on a cloud platform. You could put that solution on the public Ethereum network, right? But if everybody started doing that, we really would have a scale problem today. So my personal view is that applications for the public good will definitely run on the Ethereum network. Basically, you will see companies coming onto the public Ethereum network as well in some forms. The systems integrator EY, well, I see them as an SI because I work with them in that manner, recently launched some technology that actually, or a framework that actually allows companies to deploy enterprise grade apps onto the public Ethereum network, right? But that partnership with Microsoft is particularly exciting because it also facilitates running some of that on the Azure cloud. And I think the work that's being done just makes a bigger developer community come to Ethereum, learn Solidity, learn how to write decentralized applications. So that's very, very exciting. And that's not, some people have actually argued with me about this, and one does not replace the other. The consortium chain work being done to build consortium blockchain apps on Azure doesn't really compete with the vision of DAOs, autonomous organizations. That's going to be something totally different, and they both will coexist. But the impact for, as I was saying at the beginning of this video, for financial solutions on Ethereum, decentralized finance, that's what actually got me thinking now, and spurred me to just revisit the topic and make this video. So I'm going to end there. I think I don't want to go too long. Just a recap of what Ethereum is for some of you who are new to it still, and blockchain and smart contracts. Some examples of the potential of what these smart contracts can do. I then spoke about scaling and what can be done there. I think what I'm going to do is do videos on these particular topics, right? So a video on scaling, a video on decentralized finance, which I think is very, very important. And I'll obviously do a video on Ethereum on Azure, where things like the Cocoa framework and Westlake are being developed. You can run the Ethereum technology on a consortium chain in Azure, but you can tweak your confirmation settings. You can reduce the computational cost. And I think on one test, we got to about over 1,000 transactions per second. So it's Ethereum running on a cloud, not the mainnet, not decentralized, but really high transaction speed. And that's, something a private consortium, members of a supply chain, members of a value chain would find very, very useful. Okay, so that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Drop me some questions. Some of you, after I wrote the article a couple of years ago and my predictions article, you guys mail me questions or send me questions on LinkedIn. That's fine. Keep those questions coming and I'll try and answer them. I'll try and answer them in future with short video clips. So that's my plan. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Enjoy the rest of the day and I'll see you again soon.